Nothing but a movie. The president of France, Francois Hollande, has been starring in a really cheesy B movie. Not only is he performing tacky, cliched sex scenes on the back of a moped off the Champs-Elysees, he's been seen in California, the birthplace of the ray gun and the B movie, turning to America for economic advice in a classic trope of the B financial horror movie. For what has happened is that in the past 20 years, okay? Keep that Gil Scott-Heron track in your mind. In the past 20 years, America has changed from the producer to a consumer. And all consumers know that when the producer names a tune, the consumer has got to dance. Dance, Francois! Dance! Oh, that's right. French man can't dance. And the derivatives-wielding banksters in this B movie don't know if they want to be Matt Dillon or Bob Dylan, Ben Bernanke or Man of a Thousand Helicopters, Janet Yellen does the tapering, special effects from Abacus 2007, AC1 and inhaling crazy glue. No worries, Francois Hollande. It won't be too long before the director cuts the scene. Yeah, it's all like that in a B movie. Woo, Stacy, a little Gil Scott-Heron on this morning.
Well, if the director doesn't call cut, the people of France might, because, you know, there's a headline that reads, Francois Hollande's approval rating sets new anti-record. So apparently 79% of the French people hate him.
That's beautiful. He's a, yeah.
But their revolution, of course, is being televised. You see a lot of their days of rage all over the news. But I want to look at some other B-movie sort of headlines in the past few weeks. And some of them, one of them, the first one, comes from France itself. Michael Jackson fans sue for emotional damage suffered from his death and somehow win about $1.50 each. So there was a case brought in the courts in France by the Michael Jackson community. And the court ruled that 5 of the plaintiffs, 2 from France, 2 from Switzerland, and 1 from Belgium, had proven emotional suffering from Jackson's death. As far as I know, this is the first time in the world that the notion of emotional damage in connection with a pop star has been recognized, their lawyer Emmanuel Ludeau said.
So they want $1.50 each, which I guess would be bad enough for a one white glove. Oh, fantastic.
Well, this could set precedents as well, because, well, 79% of the population of France, for example, could claim emotional damage from the failed economic policies of their president.
Yeah, well, you know, Francois Hollande, he's scooting around France on a moped to visit his mistress, and at the same time, the Michael Jackson fans are seeking redress for the untimely death, and the government is paying out both the Michael Jackson fans some stipend for enduring the mental anguish of experiencing the death of the king of pop, while the king of drop-dead idiocy, Francois Hollande, is just on suicide watch by the French people, hoping to cash in on what would appear to be the stupidest president ever elected in the country's history.
Well, of course, the economy is not doing so well there, and there are black holes of debt at Societe Generale and BNP Paribas. Oh, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to talk about those 2 banks, apparently.
I know, isn't that amusing the way Societe Generale will go after anybody that tells the world that they're technically insolvent. They tend to write, you know, letters of all kinds of nasty French invectives like "Sacre bleu, vous êtes merde, oh mon God," you see. But the fact is, Societe Generale is technically insolvent, BNP is technically insolvent, the French economy is insolvent, and Francois Hollande is impotent.
Well, they actually, one of those banks sent basically an emotional damage letter to Ms. Shedlock of Global Economic Analysis.blogspot.com. The ironic thing, of course, being that he's an American taxpayer and the American U.S. Fed bailed out all those banks.
Right, well, they had erectile dysfunction, but they were bailed out by American monetary Viagra, and now Francois Hollande is taking full advantage by chasing skirt all over town on his little moped. Beep, beep.
Well, Francois Hollande was in Silicon Valley just last week. He could have gone down to Los Angeles and gone down to Conrad Murray and collected on these debts that the courts have rewarded these victims of the Michael Jackson death.
Star in a porno film. You know, Los Angeles is the porno capital of the world. Francois Hollande and Can't Get It Up, a new French movie starring Francois being cuckolded by mistresses all over the country, all over the world. I definitely would pay $1.50 to see that.
So he was in Silicon Valley, and you know that all of the Silicon Valley bosses are really upset about the peasants in San Francisco, who are upset about their how well they're doing. So, and there were like one of those private equity firm guys was saying that it was like Kristallnacht being there. So I thought another thing that Francois Hollande could have brought there for those people that are angry in San Francisco is something that has been imported here. Boss napping reaches the UK. 3 lap dancers kidnap nightclub boss. 3 English lap dancers are facing court accused of boss napping the head of a Cheltenham, UK nightclub when he refused to pay them half of their earnings. The latest boss napping follows an incident when 2 managers were held hostage in a Goodyear tire factory in France by employees unhappy about losing their jobs. So this happened on September 3rd, 2012, when they kidnapped their boss, who they claim owed them £21,000 because they were lap dancing at the horse races at Cheltenham. Now, the reason that this boss says he didn't pay them, however, is that they had promised that they would wear bikinis and nipple tassels at all time while doing the lap dances. But apparently the girls got completely naked and his venue was shut down. So he says he didn't earn the money.
Any aficionado of lap dancing, and by aficionado of lap dancing, I mean Francois Hollande, knows that nipple tassels are an integral part of the experience one pays when one gets a lap dance, especially if the tassels are spinning in opposite directions. That shows a certain, lap dancing acuity that one expects if you're going to fork over hard-earned money, especially at a racetrack, where it attracts, of course, the creme de la creme. At the dog track, the lap dancers are much better performers, and they get the tassels going in opposite directions. I'm surprised Francois Hollande was on at the dog track betting all of France's money with strippers and lap dancers so that he can rename his porno film from Can't Get It Up to Up All Night. You know what I'm saying, Francois? I mean, you're freaking French. You're supposed to be, naked on top of some nubile young Nubian proclaiming your independence from the king. So let's get it on.
So he was over in the U.S. and now I don't know if he talked about this boss napping idea to the people in Silicon Valley. Staying in the UK, genteel Hampstead Garden suburb is terrorized by moped ram raiders. Moped ram raiders.
It's not Francois Hollande on his moped? Look, I want to stick on boss napping because this is truly a fascinating French phenomenon. The workers kidnap their bosses for ransom. And now this is, as you point out, the story is that it's kind of migrated over to the UK, where workers, the labor force, is now kidnapping their boss and holding the boss for ransom. This is what happens when the economy suffers inequality, as it does here in the UK or in the France, where the top 1%, you mentioned the private equity guy, Tom Perkins, who claims that being rich is like suffering under Kristallnacht. So I don't know what S&M lap dancer he's been visiting, but having $1 billion is not the same as suffering Kristallnacht and the extinction of a genocidal maniacs on a ethnic group, Tom Perkins, unless you're snorting so much PCP while you're getting your lap dance that your brain is turned into frickin' mush, which I suspect is the case. You need to hook up with Francois Hollande and get on a moped and go down to the lap dance club right now and get slapped silly, get slapped straight, because you're out of your frickin' mind, Tom Perkins.
Well, the boss napping, they're not just holding them for ransom. They're kidnapping them and holding them until they get what they think they deserve. So in the case of Goodyear tire factories, I think it was 40,000 euros each all of the workers wanted before they would let the boss go, that they wanted this as reparations for working all that time there.
No, speaking of boss napping, we were in Rhode Island over the summer talking to one of your relatives, a guy who works for one of the big 4 accounting firms, who watches this show, who likes anytime we mention lap dancing and cheap lap dancing, while he's got an electronic zapper around in the collar of his dog. So here he is lounging out in his living room, does jack nothing except cook books all day for some big 4 accounting firm, zapping his poor dog like, talk about Kristallnacht. Here's a guy who's reenacting Kristallnacht right there in the Animal Kingdom living room. That's the kind of mentality you have in the big 4 accounting firms. That's the kind of mentality you have with Francois Hollande. That's the kind of mentality that's driving the global inequality. You got freaking dog zappers in their living room snorting PCP with Francois Hollande riding a moped looking for a mistress. Now, if that's not a good porno movie, I don't know what is.
Well, let's return to these moped-riding Ram Raiders. Again, not Francois Hollande and his mistress on the back of a moped off the Champs-Élysées. This is in the suburbs of London, the posh suburbs up there in Hampstead. And one of London's most genteel suburbs has been turned into Fort Knox by residents protecting their homes from ram-raiding burglars on mopeds. Homeowners in Hampstead Garden suburb have spent tens of thousands of pounds fitting iron bars onto their windows, reinforcing doors with steel bars, and encircling their multi-million-pound houses with spiked fences following the unlikely crime spree. So police are telling the residents of this area to spend the tens of thousands of dollars and pounds to upgrade the security because these people, these guys, are coming in on mopeds and it's very windy up there, so they're escaping the police and the helicopters flying overhead. One of the local residents said it sounds like Baghdad there all the time because they're chasing these guys on mopeds, but they could escape easily.
Right. Here's another funny story, isn't it? Because you've got Tom Perkins, a billionaire, claiming he's suffering crystal knocked. Here you've got people in Hampstead Heath, snooty pusses up there who have just used the copyright cartel to leech billions of dollars from the intellectual property industry, complaining because the people that they screwed, the people that they victimized, are riding in on mopeds to steal an antique coffee pot or teapot or something to sell on eBay for a few bucks so they can afford a frickin' white glove in reparation for Michael Jackson's duress that I died. Oh my God, I can't take it. So that is again an example of somebody who's been a raper and a pillager of the economy, living high on the hog, suffering the consequences of their own dastardly doings. They're being hoisted by their own petard up there in Hampstead Heath. This is what you can expect for your financial leisure domain. Your kleptocracy is coming home to roost.
Now, the funny reveal in this B movie, however, would be if the president of France, Francois Hollande, was found to be one of these Ram Raiders in Hampstead.
I have no doubt about it. He's up there because that's where all the fine ingenues are living, because he likes the quality. You know, he is French after all. And speaking of French people, you know, we got to go. But I spoke a few days ago with Pierre Jovanovic in Paris, and we're going to be talking to him shortly. So everyone stay where they are. We've got a massively interesting interview coming up.
Bien sûr.
Stay right there. Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. Je suis Max Kaiser, et maintenant on va à Paris to talk to Pierre Jovanovic, author of Blythe Masters, the best-selling book about J.P. Morgan's head of commodities and the inventor of the credit default swap, or as we like to call it, the credit defraud swap. Pierre, welcome back to the Kaiser Report.
Bonjour, Max.
Pierre, first your thoughts on the 24 hours that Blythe Masters spent on the CFTC swaps panel. Pierre.
My thought is that maybe somebody at the CFTC was in love with her. That's the only explanation I see, you know, to take such a decision. It was like a suicide for the CFTC. Especially when you think that Brooks Liborn, who was the head of the CFTC, you know, fighted her at the time. And she was fired for that.
Right. And, you know, this is a woman, Blythe Masters. She has an open, ongoing investigation by the regulators into market fraud. But it's part and parcel with this new reality, Pierre, of having both regulators and bankers and politicians all committing fraud together. There's no difference anymore. There are no regulators out there that are really doing anything. Now, a year ago or so you thought that J.P. Morgan was going to set Blythe Masters up for a huge fall. Where are we on that?
As you can see, you know, the J.P. Morgan decided to sell the Department of Commodities. But to go back to your to the previous, you know, all these politicians, bankers, etc., regulators, as we said in French, they are all in the same bed. So by this way, it's, you know, it's more practical to understand what's what's going on.
I see. So to put this in French terms, Blythe Masters was invited into a ménage à trois of fraud between regulators, bankers, and politicians. I understand, and maybe Stephanie Flanders just for a little extra spice. Now, let's talk about the French economy. There was a day of rage at the end of January which saw nearly 20,000 take to the streets against Hollande. They were chanting anti-Hollande economic slogans. What were they angry about, given the economic numbers, Pierre?
Well, I was there. I was covering the strike, and one number came out a couple of days ago, saying that in 2013, 63,000 companies, little, big ones, doesn't matter, have closed. And in 2012, we had like 50 or 55,000, and so on. So as you can see, the French economy is falling totally apart. There is no a single week you don't have a kind of big strike. When it's not the cabs, then you have the day of rage. When it's not the day of rage, it's against the homosexual marriage, and so on. So it's something we have never seen. And the survey rates of François Hollande. I remember we talked about it together, a couple of months ago. But now they're falling so low that maybe he's going to find some oil or something, because he's at 18% of satisfaction, if we can call that satisfaction. So it's quite interesting anyway.
So let me ask you about this kind of in a broader context, because over the past few years, during the Eurozone crisis, we've seen countries down in the south of Europe, like Greece, Portugal, and Cyprus, go through a crisis. The economies collapse, unemployment skyrockets, and there was some idea at that time that there would be a contagion, and that this problem would travel north and get to France. Is that true? Is this basically part of the overall problems we've seen in the past 5 years finally arriving on the doorsteps of France, Pierre?
Oh, yeah, definitely, Max, definitely. To give you a couple of examples, what we have seen in Greece, like 3-4 years ago, we start to see it in France. Example, you have companies saying to the employees, you have the choice. Either we're going to move the factory in Poland or Romania or whatever, or either you accept your 30% cut of your salary. So we're seeing something interesting, but it's the same pattern as in Greece. You started to level down the salary of people, and of course the statistics of the unemployment have been totally distorted, as in United States. So it's absolutely frightening, really frightening, and we have it's very scary, because for the first maybe for the first time this year might be the one with a couple of deaths, the next strikes we're going to have, because the day of rage will go on, and the Ministry of Interior is extremely careful about that. So he's fighting them also. So there is when you have François Hollande have the power with only 18% of satisfaction, so he cannot go on very long. Traders in New York and in London are going to have a lot of fun, in the next couple of months.
Well, you mentioned the traders in New York and London. Of course, right before Greece collapsed, Goldman Sachs, it's now well understood, made enormous bets on the collapse of Greece, and they profited handsomely. The insiders, Papandreou, was benefiting by some financial fraud, and so it was really set up to fail. And we see some other similarities. In Greece, of course, after the collapse that was engineered by Wall Street, you had a rise of neo-Nazism. In France, just recently, as part of a huge protest, almost 20,000 neo-Nazis were in the street shouting, screaming anti-Semitic slogans.
Well, let me correct you on this one, because I covered there were no 20,000. I mean, there was actually it was like 80,000 people in the streets, and there were like 1,000 people, scanning this kind of stuff. So it's a difficult mix up, but that was made by the French media who wanted this day to be off of the screen of the radar.
Okay, so let's be clear then. So there was approximately 1,000, you say, of anti-Semitic neo-Nazi types in the street. There is a similarity with what's going on in Greece, however, when an economy becomes completely distorted, when there's reparations to be paid. In this case, reparations are being paid to the likes of corrupt bankers like Blythe Masters and J.P. Morgan. There's a rage that boils over. People start looking for scapegoats. People start becoming violent. And you're suggesting that in 2014, we could see this type of violence that we have seen in Greece. We could see it in France. Is that correct?
It's definitely correct. Let me just remind you something regarding Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs came out, I think it was 2 years ago, saying in a French newspaper that salaries are too high in France. And Goldman Sachs, could you imagine that, saying, you know, we want the salaries going down of 30%. And basically, this is what is happening now. So this is the perfect pattern. And of course, in France, we can see the extreme right going up. Definitely, that's for sure. You have the movement from Alain Soral, for instance. You have the movement from from some other little parties, but they're not as strong as they were in Greece. Don't forget that. Marine Le Pen, on the contrary, she is going to have. I think she is going to make a very, very interesting score at the election in March, and we're going to have the European elections in May. And this one is going to be really frightful because I think she's going to win on this one. And she's against Europe.
Right. So just to be clear, you do see a rise of a neo-Nazi element in France, but the media seems to be blowing it up in a huge proportion to take attention away from the fact that the Hollande government is corrupt and in bed with the bankers who have been involved in wholesale fraud for 5 to 10 years and in bed with the likes of what I call financial terrorists like Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan. Now, what's happening in Switzerland? They had a vote on the limit to EU immigration, and this has set off a chain reaction of comments. What are your thoughts?
It's exactly as what you said previously. The economic crisis hit also Switzerland. So the Swiss people are fed up with the immigration, and this is going to backfire, of course, for the Europeans. Regarding to go back for the elections. We cannot say that the neo-Nazis are very, very strong here. Seriously, I mean, they're just really a tiny minority. But the French people are totally fed up with the government. And for the little story, listen to this. During the presidential campaign, François Hollande said, like in a big meeting, presidential meeting, the finance is his enemy. Finance is my enemy. Exactly. This is what he said. And 3 days later, precisely, he took the Eurostar. He went to London, to see all the financial people there, saying, this is. I just say that, to win the election, but don't worry, And what we saw here in Paris is that François Hollande, is the enemy of the finances of the French people, but not the London people, traders.
Right. Okay. So just to be clear, François Hollande is against French people having any financial literacy or sovereignty, but he's happy to give the British people plenty of financial sovereignty. But this is a pattern we've seen all over Europe. We have about 1 minute left. Let's talk about François Hollande some more. He's the first French president in 50 years not to be invited to address Congress on a state visit. Foreign direct investment into France is at a 27-year low. Airbus is planning to lay off 1,400 employees in France. You were talking about a possibility of a revolution a year ago or so in France. And since that time, the events seem to be supporting your thesis. We have about a minute, 30 seconds left, Pierre.
I think it's time to see some changement in France, because the French people are not going to react like the Greek or the people from Cyprus. It's really interesting to see how quiet Greek people state. Don't you think so?
Well, it's in France, certainly when I was living there, everyone from the taxi driver on up always comes back with the idea that, well, if things get bad enough, we'll just start a revolution. It seems ingrained in their culture. But we're out of time. Pierre, thanks so much for being on the Kaiser Report.
Merci, Max.
And that's all the time we have for this edition of the Kaiser Report with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Pierre Jovanovic, the author of Blythe Masters, a fantastic book. If you'd like to send us an email, please do so, kaiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, bye, y'all.